Welcome to the Rich Relationship Podcast with Gil
and Renee, where amazing things happen. Our goal is to help build, repair, and restore healthy relationships.
Our primary focus is on the marriage relationship. However, the topics are applicable to the relationships that we value most. Remember, we're stronger together.
Let's grow.
Rich Relationship Podcast, episode number 7. Don't take it personal, conflict resolution. There is some thunder going on. It's not because we are in conflict. It's because it's actually raining outside.
Yes, it is.
So,
I was kind of wondering if they were going to hear that while we were recording.
Yeah, so if you hear some thundering over the recording, we just wanted to stay on schedule this week with our recording. So if you hear some thundering, it's not because me and Renee are having conflict. It's because...
You know, when I was little, they used to say if you heard it, thunder, it was God moving his furniture. So maybe he's in conflict with his decor.
Okay. Well, today we're going to actually be talking about a subject that I think affects every person.
Yes.
At some point in their life. I would say even before you can actually even talk, we're going to be talking about conflict.
Yes.
On this episode of the Rich Relationship Podcast with Gil and Renee.
And the title is called Don't Take It Personal.
So we ain't gonna take it personal. We just gonna get into the episode.
Yes.
As I mentioned earlier on this episode of the Rich Relationship Podcast with Gil and Renee, I mentioned the conflict starts early in our life. And it's funny because I was actually watching my nephew who was in conflict with his sister over a toy.
You must be talking about Elisha.
Yes. He wanted it and she was not giving that thing up. And before we even decided that we kind of decided that we were going to be doing this episode about conflict, but that was a snapshot to me about some of the things we're going to be talking about today on this episode about conflict. And I just watched him and he was throwing a tantrum. He was crying. He was making all kind of noise and he was showing and I think absolutely. And I think and
who taught him how to do that?
It is ingrained in us from the very beginning, and he can't even talk yet.
Yes.
Really. I mean, he tries to talk, but he can't talk yet. And it was so funny because God brought it to my mind that, see, that's exactly how we are even as adults. We are still throwing tantrums as adults, exactly. And we have an extensive vocabulary. So that's actually the conflict and the source that I think, and I said this to you earlier while we were talking about the episode, even before we started recording was, and I'm going to make this statement and hopefully it
will make you think.
Yeah, absolutely. And every source, the source of every conflict is I'm not getting what I want.
And you know why I can prove that it's true? James 4 says, why are there arguments and quarreling amongst you?
Mm-hmm.
You ask and you don't get. You covet and you kill, but you cannot receive. Is it because you ask with the wrong motives and you want to spend it on yourself? So that just proves that the arguments and the quarrels that we are going through, that's James chapter 4. James chapter 4, it's just basically talking about the arguments and the quarreling that we are in. It starts internally. It's an internal conflict with ourselves. And because we want something that the person is not giving us or can't give us or won't give us. And so what we have to do is reconcile in our own hearts. How are we going to react as an adult when someone takes our toy?
Mm-hmm.
Or when they do something that we don't like? Are we going to react like a 2-year-old? Or are we going to react like a mature adult?
And that's actually the path that we have to talk about, because when you think about the root cause to all the conflicts is I'm not getting what I want.
Right.
You know, and when you think about that, it makes you challenge your own thought processes and makes you do some internal self-examination about, and I think you have to really start to say, what is it that I want?
Right.
First. That is like the first step in going through this and understanding the sources of the conflict. And we were talking about it again earlier. A lot of the sources comes internally. Like you were describing, you know, we have these things that we want and desire, and you are going to be going not against what you may already have thought about in your own life, but you're going to actually have to go to someone, because we are in a world of people. In every conflict, you're going to have one of the common denominators is going to be with people.
Yes. And sometimes with yourself. Because I think that when we don't address our own personal internal conflicts, then it makes us it escalates the amount of conflicts you're going to have with other people. Mm-hmm. I think that the more peace you have on the inside of your heart, the easier it is to navigate in a world where everyone is dealing with the same thing and not be a part of the problem, be a part of the solution.
And this is a question that you can even ask yourself as you're listening to this episode, that ask yourself this question: do I really know what I want from the other person or persons that I'm in conflict with? Because that is going to be the root of the conflict.
Yeah. And I think about, we were talking about an example. You said, do you remember the first conflict we ever had? Mm-hmm. And of course I thought about a whole bunch of them, but I think the one that you gave the best example was with our first real, because that really was our first real conflict. And that was the
go ahead.
It was the date when we were supposed to go on a date, and you went and work with someone.
Yeah, I went to help a friend who had just recently purchased a business, and he didn't have any employees. So I went over there to help him run his store for a little while, and it just lost track of time. And what you can tell the story about what happened afterwards.
Well, I'll tell from my perspective. Well, this was before cell phones, and so this was like back in the day when people used home phones.
Right.
And Gil was very punctual. He was always on time, and so we were supposed to go on a date. He didn't call. He didn't respond to my phone calls. And so the longer he went without responding, the angrier I got. And so by the time I finally talked to him, I had already gone through like 25 steps of anger and frustration and tearing things up, and just I was upset. I was really upset. And looking back on it now, I was so upset about that because I had my own issues. I think that when you have a lot of turmoil inside, every little thing escalates.
It kind of sets it off.
It just makes it worse. And so I think that had I been in a better place on my own, I probably would not have reacted the way. And I did. I was in Gil saying I cussed him out. Yes, I cussed him out.
Again, y'all.
I cussed him out twice in a time. As long as we've been together, I've cussed him out twice. And they were both before we were saved.
Right.
And we were both young. We were teenagers. But you could just tell that was one of my go-to solutions, was to use my mouth as a weapon. And so how we resolved that, I don't even really remember. I guess we had a talk.
And we've been talking for a long time. And I think back to that episode to where what happened. And when you think about root causes, was it that you wanted an apology? Was it that you wanted me to take responsibility for my own actions and how I messed up? Or did you want me to just give in to your requests and your demands? You better show up or whatever. But you couldn't reach me at the time. So that kind of goes back to what we were talking about, is when you have that conflict, what is it that you want? So sometimes you can have, and we're going to talk a little bit about it and later in this episode about the inner conflict that you have in yourself, but you were sitting there stewing over this thing,
having this whole conversation. And it's really bad to have a conversation with another person without them there, because you're answering the questions based on it goes back to autobiographical listening. Mm-hmm. We do everything autobiographically. We're listening to things through the scope of our own past experiences. And like I said, I've been disappointed a lot, so I was used to being disappointed. And this was something Gil had never done. He'd never not kept his word. And so what I would hope we would understand is that when we're angry, when we're in our feelings, we're not being rational.
Sometimes
you're going to make decisions when you're angry that you will regret.
And it's funny because you can actually have, and I think everybody has done this at one point in time, where you have a conflict with somebody and that person is nowhere around.
Right.
But you having an argument in your mind internally with this person about what's going on. And that can be bad in a sense because you're filling in blanks, and this person is not even there to contribute to the conflict or to resolution, to hopefully to get to resolution of the conflict, and you are just going off. And then once you actually get in their presence, you like, man, you had this all planned out and everything that you were going to say, and it just kind of eludes you or escapes, and you're like dumbfounded.
Yeah. And see, the thing about it was that I'm grateful because my godmother, she was a very wise woman, and she, her question was, well, this isn't like Gil, so you can't just allow one situation to erase all the good he's done all along. So you're going to end your relationship, because I had broke up with him. I had all of his stuff in the box.
But I didn't even know.
Yeah, he didn't even know about it. I mean, I was so upset. I went to the kitchen and drank a bottle of cooking sherry. I was tripping. Looking back on it now.
Right.
And my godmother, she was like, you know what? You're going to end your relationship with him over one situation. And I think that's something I thought about today, was that conflict only destroys relationships that are really not strong.
Right.
If you're going to have a conflict and it's going to destroy your relationship, the relationship wasn't strong enough, because you're going to have conflicts. That's a part of relationships. And
it's a part of life.
It's a part of life. You're going to have conflicts. And so it's a matter of learning how to ask yourself, what's more important, the quality of this relationship or me getting what I want?
And as you think about those conflicts that you have, and I have, you guys know, as I go through this, I have material and things and lists and stuff like that, that it's really important that you always do some assessments.
Yes.
Always do some inner looking at you,
right.
Especially when you're in relationship with someone else. It's easy to look at the other person,
right,
and point out flaws and difficulties and shortcomings and all the things that we kind of talk about in these episodes, but you have to look at you first.
You have to, always, in every situation.
And even in conflict, you actually have a style in your conflict. And we're going to talk about this. In the very first one, there's actually 5 different conflicts styles that you have. And the first 2 are the ones that most people will stay with, and I actually was looking at this information, and I'm the very first one. I'm going to put myself out there. I am a suppressor. When I have I know this is a shock.
Oh my gosh, I'm shocked.
But when I have a problem, this is where I'm actually deflecting from discussion. I don't want to talk about it. I'm keeping it to myself. It's almost like putting a forbidden thing on whoever I'm in conflict with, that I won't even go into it.
Right.
And I keep it to myself.
Right.
And naturally, I know, even though we're doing a podcast and this is an external thing, I'm naturally an introvert, personally. Right. I say I lean more towards introvertness than I do external or being an extrovert. But suppression is my default.
Right.
And the second one is avoidance. Now, it's a little bit different from how you suppress it, because you're actually refusing to talk to someone about who you have this dispute with. Most people are stuck at these 2, when it comes to suppression or avoidance.
Right.
Out of those 2, which one would you say you kind of lean more toward?
I'm neither of those.
You're neither of those.
No.
What are you?
I like to resolve things.
And that's the third one. You have to get to the resolution part. But the one thing that is actually interesting when you go to resolution, there is some actual habits and tactics that we actually have developed over time. And you can tell me if any of these resonate with you, that you can listen to on the Rich Relationship Podcast with Gil and Renee. Here we're talking about conflict resolution. And what's the title that you came up with?
Don't take it personal.
Don't take it personal. So the very first one is, and you already did this one, these are some of the almost resolution things that when you're working towards resolution, you actually have these habits that you maybe have developed over time, and some of them are ingrained, like my nephew having a temper tantrum, and some of them are actually developed over time because of our experiences and
the way people react to you in conflict.
The first one is anger.
Yes.
This is the one that you were just talking about. You're driven by emotions. Mm-hmm. You're not thinking
rationally.
Mm-hmm.
You're in your feelings as a kid.
And this is one that you can tend to be trying to intimidate people and also control people. Mm-hmm. And that's one that I think people will definitely have problems with when nobody wants to be controlled. Now, the other kind of habit that you kind of developed, and this is somebody who's very flattering, charismatic. You're having a conflict before you can even get to the conflict, before you can get to resolution. But these are all driven by you trying to get your way more than resolve the conflict.
Right.
And that's something that you have to think about when it comes to conflict resolution. Is it's not necessarily about you getting your way.
It's about finding a resolve for both people.
Exactly. A mutual agreed upon resolution towards a situation.
Where both people get what they need. Not just one person. Because it's not just one person in a relationship.
Oh, no. Would you say, well, I won't say this, I'll ask that question. Men and women tend to, I think when it comes to anger, I would say men will probably default to this one quicker than a woman would, and being charismatic or very flattering, and as I just described that one, are charming.
The gift of persuasion is one of the gifts of, it's a blessing and a cursing.
And would you say, and I would say a woman would probably,
yes.
And I'm not being chauvinistic. I know these can be either one.
It's just a matter of understanding the way God wired us. I mean, that's one of the things that happened in the garden.
Right.
It says you'll want to be head over him, but instead he'll be head over you.
Now, the next one is promises. When you try to get to the point where you're trying to resolve a conflict, and you'll make any kind of promises that you can. And this is, again, to get your way, not to get to a resolution, that you'll do whatever it takes just to get past it. Persuasive arguments. It's almost like...
But that's still deflecting. That's still really not addressing
the real issue. Right. And these are all, like I was saying, these are all things that people do before you can even get to resolution. Right. And we're going to talk about the way you can get to a resolution in a positive way. These are some of the preconceived habits that people have. If you're persuasive in your argument, these are, I won't say, again, I'm not trying to be chauvinistic, but this is the one that I think women will more likely lean towards.
Right. Because it's the way we're wired.
And persuasive information, women, everybody, you can look at statistics and science and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Women have a more extensive vocabulary than most men as far as how many words we use and things like that. You may have heard that when you comes to argument, and we've been married for a while.
Yeah.
And it's not that we have discussions. We don't do the knockdown, drag out fighting and that kind of thing, but
it's not productive.
But sometimes I feel like, man, I have so much to say, but it's like you done whipped it out, and I'm like, ugh. I have no words.
Do you think that it's gotten better since we've gotten older?
Yeah.
Because especially like let's go back to the situation we were talking about before our first conflict.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was when I didn't know that men don't use as many words as women.
Right.
And that I don't think I was really helping you to learn. That's one of the things the Lord showed me. You can't expect for him to know how to deal with your feelings if you don't learn how to share them with him in a way where he knows what to do with them. Because if you just dump it all out at one time for a guy, that's overwhelming.
Right. And even with that, where you may be more persuasive in your vocabulary and those types of things, one thing that I know that we actually have identified with us is if you want to relate to me in a situation logically, is where I can really grasp on.
So instead of saying, how do you feel? I always say, babe, what are you thinking?
Right. And that helps. And now the next one is called shaming. Mm-hmm. These are the expressions of dismiss, you shock, and you disapprove another's behavior. Usually this makes them feel bad.
Right.
You're trying to make them feel bad about how they feel. It's how somebody feels, even when you're going through a conflict, is not right or it's not wrong.
It's just how they feel.
Right. And they have to be secure or feel safe enough to be able to communicate that to their partner. And
to be able to agree to disagree.
And if they can't do that, one of the things that they're going to build up is those barriers and those blockers to stop the whole process of going through. They're going to fall back into the suppression and the avoidance. They're not going to talk about. These are all things you think about it that will make the person revert back to the first two.
Right.
You suppress and avoid, where right now we're talking about resolution. These are just the things to get to resolution. And if you don't rightfully embrace them,
right,
it's going to shut it down.
Right.
So the next one is gaming. This is really another better way of saying this: manipulating or bargaining. Mm-hmm. Playing games, negotiation. If you do this, I'll do that.
Right.
This is, it's not working towards resolution. It's still me putting what I want first almost like you trying to do a business deal or a transaction to get what I want to accomplish, what I desire, which is the rightful agreement to get what I want out of the conflict, where I come out on top.
Yeah. And when it comes to conflicts, and it comes to arguments, and it comes to disagreements, there is no win, or you don't win by getting your way. You win by thinking about how is this going to make the other person feel, and not just think about yourself. Because I think something we learned early was that there is no win or lose. It's like accept responsibility so that you can move on and begin to work on understanding each other better versus just wanting to get your way.
Right. And then the next two that we're talking about is threatening. This is something that we made an agreement even when we got married that we would never play the divorce card or the breakup card. Even when we were dating, we wouldn't do those, I won't call them breakups, or where you have those times where you just together and you're not together and you're back off together. And I was like, you're better off of just going your separate ways.
Because I would say off and on ends up off.
Right. And then after we got married, that was something we never threatened the other when we were in conflict with the divorce card.
Or even threaten your physical safety. You know, someone who would physically threaten, use because men are naturally bigger than women.
Right.
For a man to use his physical stature as an advantage over you, that's not a healthy way to deal with conflict, because it makes you shut down. And if you don't, I always say, whatever you don't talk out, you're going to act out. And that's why you see couples that in one setting they're fine, but when you get them in a setting by themselves, they go their separate ways because they still have unresolved conflict. And you don't want to act like everything is okay.
Right.
You're going to really learn how to really
deal with those
have things be a clean slate.
And they go back to avoiding. It's almost like reverting back to your default of avoiding and suppressing if you're going through trying to get to resolution. And then, as you just mentioned about the physical force, now the physical force is, like you just talked about, tend to be more men on that side, but it can be women.
Do it too.
Yeah, yes. It can be. And then the other side of that, I will even caveat this and say, added to that is an emotional and mental abuse, so to speak, or force on a guy. So those are some of the resolution habits that you can get into that will prevent you from getting to resolution. The barriers
to actually having resolution versus the tools you need. So how do we overcome those? What are some of the things we do to overcome
some of those things we get to do to overcome those? And once you get past those, you actually want to get to the point where you actually are transforming. You're actually transforming in the sense of you're using the conflict to explore. This is where you're trying to get to. Right. And we're going to talk about how to get to those points here in a second with some of the things that we've used in the past and some of the couples that we've worked with, how to resolve a conflict. And because it's a process. It is. It's a process that you can actually go through, because the goal of the process that you want to go through is to get to the transforming part where you can actually use that conflict as a point of resolution, but also once it's resolved, you can use it to allow your relationship to grow
and get better. Let's talk more about what you said about our first conflict. So from your side of the fence, what happened from your side?
From what happened from the first side, and it's going all the way back to, if you're just joining us on the Rich Relationship Podcast with Gil and Renee, we're talking about conflict resolution, and don't take it personal. Renee told the story about what we would probably say is our first conflict, where I was supposed to show up for our date and I was helping a friend. And from my side of the street, and I was just helping this person out. But once we actually talked, I wanted to get to the point of what's really the problem. You know, are you mad that I didn't show up? Are you mad that I stood you up or that I didn't call? That's what I wanted to find out. What are you really mad about? You know, and I think as we talked about it, I think it kind of gave back to is, like Renee said, I was always punctual and always on time. And it really, if I had to say what the root cause was, I didn't keep my word.
That's what it was.
I didn't keep my word. I didn't do what I said I was going to do. And
another thing is, I didn't feel like I was the priority. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the thing in relationships. When someone is the priority, someone else can't take that place. And so I think that was a part of it. You know, I didn't feel like I was a priority, and I didn't feel like you kept your word. And so those are the things. And looking back on it now, and I think it made our relationship stronger, because then we got to really understand what you need from me.
Right.
It's not about you're going to have things come up. Just let me know. And so that's something we've always done as a couple, as, you know, hey, if I'm going to be late, or if I need to make changes, I'm just going to respect you enough to let you know that.
Right. And so, and this is even before we even had any kind of formal training or went through, we were still just dating. We were still just kids in that sense. But
I think we were, what, 18?
Yeah, so I was still in high school.
We've been old our whole life, huh?
Probably acting like old folks, but that's a whole nother conversation. So we're going to actually get a little bit more into this, but at this point in our topics or in our show, we actually going to go into got wisdom and got questions.
It's that time.
So what you got? You had two of them, which was from our listeners, and we just want to say thank you for all the listeners. We are growing, y'all.
Yes, we are.
So, and Renee,
and guess what, babe?
What's up?
This is episode number 7.
Yeah.
Woo! Bells and whistles, clap, clap, clap. This is like a major
plateau.
I'll say it's a major milestone to reach the 7th episode. And so thank you for sticking with me for these 7 episodes.
It's been fun.
Thank you all for being a part of this and listening to us and sharing it. And we're
hopefully
on so many different platforms.
Yeah, and I thank you for all your work. You know, I know that's a lot of work. I see it, you know, the podcast is fun and we enjoy it, but it's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes that is not here in the studio, aka closet, that we do. Other than just talking and recording this, you know, there's a lot of things that you have to do outside of this. And I thank you for that, all your work, getting it up so everybody can listen to it. I had somebody came up to me today and seen the sticker on the car and they were like, whoa, I heard y'all. And I was like, really? That's good. That's good. And they were like, I'm going to keep listening. I thought that was pretty cool. So.
Yeah, so thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for being a part of our community. And let's help us to grow. And so let's go into our Got Wisdom and Got Question.
Okay, so what you got?
So our Got Wisdom comes from Robin Hare from Winston, Georgia.
Georgia, thank y'all for listening.
Thank you, Georgia. Thank you.
Robin.
I love you, Robin.
And what'd she say?
Her wisdom really was our conversation. We were just talking. She was just sharing something with me. And her wisdom was, we have got to live our lives treating the things that are entrusted into our care as if we are a steward and not an owner. Mm-hmm. And that sounds really simple, but it's so important. Let's just use an example. If you're living in the house, car you drive, the house you live in, the spouse you have, your children are all belong to the Lord.
They're gifts.
They are gifts. And we should treat them as if they belong to the Lord and not they belong to us. Because I think that we treat things we don't own sometimes better.
Right.
And so I just thought that was so beautiful. So I wanted to share that because we have got to learn how to shift our mind from I own this to I get to use this.
Right. And it's an attitude of gratitude and appreciation.
It does. And it's humbling to be borrowing someone's stuff. You're going to treat it different than if you think it's yours. So that's our Got Wisdom. So thanks, Robin. We love you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And our Got Question came from Manette Harris from Montgomery, Alabama. Woo woo, our home where we live now. And her question was, how do you have a companion of the opposite gender if you don't have a desire to get married? So, babe, I'm gonna let you answer that question.
You're gonna let me start?
You
okay, from the guy's perspective, I'll say it this way: it's important when you have a companion because you were my companion when we were just dating.
Yes.
And I think, if you listen to the other episode where it says I wanted to get married early, that wasn't what I was pursuing. To get married to you at the time, because while that may have been something that I had in the back of my mind, it was more about developing the friendship. I think all the successful relationships that we know, people who we know who have successful relationships and marriages and those things, the common denominator is they are friends.
They're friends.
That's the essence of the foundation, if I can say it that way. That is the foundation
of a healthy, rich relationship. It's friendship.
Absolutely. And if you're, and I think the marriage part may come and it may not, because like she said in her question, if you don't have the desire is not there because you just meeting the person, or you just are just friends. Right. It's just like the person is still really a stranger. You really don't know them enough to say, oh, I want to jump straight to marriage. You're just starting the relationship itself. So you haven't even had enough time to even develop to get to the point of marriage. So I would say that's okay to have that feeling right now, but it's just a feeling. You don't know what God has for you until you do the work prior to that, which is being a friend first.
Yes. And I agree with that. I think it's important to be honest with people when you're going into relationships with them as to what your intentions are. But I think it would be kind of arrogant to say, well, hey, I want to be your friend, I don't want to marry you. It's like, that's kind of like putting the horse before the cart. Mm-hmm. So I think it's just better to just enjoy the moment, right, and to enjoy the relationship and to enjoy the friendship. Because I do believe that you can be friends with someone of the opposite sex without it leading to anything other than just pure friendship. As long as you're honest, you're open, and you're transparent. But you have to be also open to, it could become
more
marriage,
than that, yeah.
But that's not what you're looking for.
That's not.
So I think that's really a healthy place to be, actually, because a lot of women who are single, they go into every relationship, well, this is going to be my husband. It might not be.
Right.
He's just going to be your friend. And guess what? Even if you don't marry that person, he can still always be your friend.
And there's still value in that.
Yes.
So we thank Robin and we thank Monette for their got wisdom, got questions in this relationship. And also, you can always find us on our website at richrelationshipsus.com, or you can actually see our YouTube channel. We have it out there, The Rich Relationships with Gil and Renee. Or you can send your email questions or anything like that to richrelationshipsus@gmail.com. Thank you.
It's my pleasure.
So as we talked about some of the issues with conflict and some of the habits that we have
and what's
already,
the root cause
and
of
the
it,
root cause. And
the first step is to not take it personal or not make it personal.
Right.
Because conflict is only bad when they're unresolved, or when you make it personal.
Right. And like I mentioned earlier, when we talk about resolution or coming to resolving, it's a process. And sometimes people have conflicts that they may have had, and especially when it comes to a relationship or marriage, or even in a
family.
A family.
Or at work.
If you haven't been, I won't say taught it, you don't know it, but if you haven't been exposed to a process of resolving a conflict, these things can go on for years and years.
Then you forget what the root cause is, and then everything becomes the problem.
So,
everything is a conflict.
Right. So in the program that we got certified in, we're Preparing and Rich, and that's one of the things that they taught us. And some of these things you may already do,
right,
but now you can actually put a label and a name on them and say, oh, I do that. So you
can continue to do it over and over again.
And that's where you develop those, where we talked about the pre-habits that you have when it comes to resolution. Some of those barriers can stop you from getting to resolution in a conflict. These are some positive steps, some actual steps that you can take to get to a real resolution, and regardless of the conflict that you're in, whether it's one with your spouse, your significant other,
at the grocery store, in line, driving in your car.
The first step, and you kind of mentioned it a little bit, is we talked about it, is you have to define the problem.
Yes.
What is the real problem? What is it that we talked about? The source of all conflict is you're not getting what you want.
Right.
But in light of getting what you want, you have to know what is the root cause of this conflict that we may be in. So that's the first part, which is defining the problem. And when you define the problem, you have to be very specific
and very honest.
And you can't.
And that you have to be self-reflective. You have to be doing personal inventory. You can't try to figure out the other person's part. You have to figure out, what do I bring to this? What could I do different? What do I need? And what could I have done? How could I have handled this differently?
Right. And so even when you talk about being specific, sometimes you focus on symptoms and not the actual problem. You know, you mentioned it in one of the episodes earlier where me leaving the toothpaste cap off of the toothpaste on the sink was the problem. And no, that's a symptom.
That's a symptom.
The problem was I work too much, and I'm,
right.
You know, that's really what's bothering you. But the toothpaste being left on the counter in this bathroom is the one that just set it off.
Right.
So don't focus on the symptoms. Be specific in defining your problem. And you just kind of alluded to the next one is you have to own your part in the problem.
In everything that happens.
What way did you contribute to this problem once you've identified it? And your significant other or the person, your spouse or whoever you're in the conflict with can't tell you what you did. You have to be able to identify what you did.
And using your I statements. I have a problem. When you leave the toothpaste top off on the counter, it makes me feel that you don't appreciate me.
Right, cleaning up, whatever it may be.
And you don't ever say, you don't ever do anything, you never help me. You can't make it all, lump it all together. You have to deal with each incident as one incident and not bring everything all together. And it's one of the things that we do, I think, that is really good is that if I come to you with something that's bothering me, hey, Gil, I have a problem.
Mm-hmm.
This is bothering me. And then you take that and you say, okay. You don't then say, oh, well, since you're telling me what you did, well, let me tell you what you did to me. That is a very unhealthy way to deal with conflict. Mm-hmm. The person who brought the conflict should have the right to know that they can come to you with a conflict and you're not going to then put it back on them.
That's not your opportune time to say, oh, well, since you brought it up, I have this problem. It's not going back for tit for tat, because that's falling back into the pre-resolution habits. That's the gaming. Those are some of the other traits that we talked about earlier.
And then you make the person forget. Now, what did I even, you start making them, because I remember.
Shaming them.
Yeah, I started, wait a minute. Because I remember when I was dating, when I was younger, I remember whenever this one guy was dating, whenever I would tell him anything he did, he made me feel like I was wrong. I was like, wait a minute, something's wrong. Then, of course, when we start learning all this stuff, I'm like, that is a tactic of a person who's a manipulator, is to make you feel like you are the person that is wrong.
Right. So, and then this is the next step that then we're talking about some steps that you can take to resolving this. Think about some of the past attempts that you did. What did you do to try to resolve this problem that did not work?
Right.
Because if you don't identify, well, that didn't work, and more than likely you didn't do the first two. You didn't define the problem and you didn't own your part in the problem. And then, or how did you contribute to this problem? Because it's unresolved.
Right.
It keeps coming back up. So if you have these problems that keep coming up or keep surfacing over something that may be very simple, and it comes up and it blows back, and you're like, I thought we dealt with this already.
Obviously we didn't.
Right. The other person didn't have resolution in that thing. And then, so now once you actually have kind of identified the problem, you've listed your parts and your how you contributed to the problem, you thought about some of the past steps that you tried to take. Now you're actually going to come together and say, okay, what are some solutions we could do?
And write it down.
Brainstorming, brainstorming.
Which is helping your communication.
Yeah, and this is the time where nothing is off the table. No matter how crazy it may sound, well, in order for me...
You're not going to buy toothpaste no more.
Yeah, exactly. You can say that. That could be a brainstorming thing. If we're not going to buy toothpaste, or we're going to buy 5 tubes of toothpaste, or we're going to buy... Or I ain't going to brush my teeth. No, I'm just going to joke. No. So, but it's brainstorming. It's coming up with some solutions that we can do to actually come to a point to where we can resolve this thing.
And no matter what the other person brings, you have to make sure you give them the freedom to bring their idea, and that you actually hear it and say, what, let's put that down too.
Nothing is off the table, because you don't want to fall back into the pre-habits again where you shame them or feel, that's dumb,
right.
That don't make no sense, or whatever. Now you're going back into, you want to repeat this problem again.
Yes.
That's what you're really saying.
Yes.
So then you think about, as you come up with a list, you can come up with as many as you want. A lot of times we deal with couples, we just say try to come up with 5 to 10 of them, or whatever the case may be. But once you come up with some solutions, then you start whittling them away. Right. You start saying, okay, that one really doesn't make sense.
Right.
You agree about it, and you mutually decide, okay, because you want to get all the way down to 1 or 2 that you can say, okay, these are the ones that we're going to try. Specifically 1. Where you whittle them away, however you decide to get to that point, you decide that we're going to work on this solution together. That's actually, believe it or not, guys, this is actually 8 steps that you've already accomplished in trying to come to a resolution on this problem. So again, just a quick recap of this. You're going to discuss it. You're going to define the time, or you're going to discuss and define the problem. You want to be specific. You're going to list some ways that you contributed to the problem. You're going to look at some past attempts that you did to try to resolve them that you didn't have success on. You're going to brainstorm some ideas. You're going to start talking about some solutions that you can come up with. You're going to decide on one specific thing that we can do to try to resolve this thing. Decide how you're going to actually work on this together. You're going to say, well, I'm going to do my part. I'm going to take this on and say, this is what I can do for this solution. You can say, this is what you're going to do for this solution. And then once you kind of have done that, you can use it a time to say, okay, let's let this go. And we'll see, we're going to come back next week and we'll see how we're doing with this particular situation or particular problem. And
you're going to reward your partner's efforts for sticking to the solution. And the first one is we're going to set aside time to talk about it. Because there has to be where it goes back to making it a priority. Number one is making it a priority to resolve this. Because when you say, hey, you know what, this is going on and I really want us to talk, that makes the person really feel like, man, you care enough about me or what's going on with me to set aside a time. So that's important. And then the last one is to reward the partner in their efforts for sticking to the solution, because a part of it is that we're all very reward oriented. Everyone wants to feel like, we say to the kids, good job, high five. But we all need that. It's the way God created us to be. We are drawn to being rewarded and appreciated and celebrated, not criticized and torn apart.
Right. So those are some of the steps that you can actually take to actually a formula or a process to actually get to resolution on a conflict that you may be in.
I love all your notes and all your graphs and all your input that you put, because
I'm a nerd, y'all. I'm a nerd.
It's okay. We're both nerds. We were looking at the pictures of us when we were little. Carmen was like, you guys both look like nerds. My glasses matched my dress. But you were coordinating. Yes, I was, even back then. But I think a part of what I think about when you think about biblically, when you think about, the heart of people, when I think about the conflicts I've had that have been left unresolved, it's because I always want to resolve. I always want there to be resolution. That's just the way I'm wired. Let's talk about it. Let's work through it. But a part of what I want to talk about, well, what do you do when the other person doesn't want to resolve?
Right.
And a lot of times we talk about forgiveness, conflict resolution, you have to think about forgiveness. When you forgive someone, it doesn't mean there's going to be reconciliation.
Not all the time.
And so I think a part of it, we can't talk about conflict resolution and ignore the fact that there are going to be some situations, disagreements, where the other person has made up in their mind and in their heart, they don't have anything to do with you.
They don't want resolution.
They don't want resolution.
Unfortunately.
Some people like holding on to grudges. They want to hold you hostage because they want to hold a grudge. The wisest thing to do in situations like that is to be okay with knowing that when people are in a fixed mindset, like we talked about last week on our previous episode, when someone has a fixed mindset, you have to learn how to love them where they are, but be okay with leaving them there.
Right.
Because healthy relationships that are going to be beneficial to you, are going to be people who are working towards resolution and working towards making things work. So I remember T.D. Jakes saying, if someone can walk out of your life, let them go.
Right.
And so I think that as believers, sometimes we feel like, well, I have to let people abuse me and mistreat me. No, that's not healthy.
And that can be tough when you are in a relationship with somebody. It may be somebody you're close to, maybe a relative,
or you've known a long time,
or even somebody you've been in a relationship with for a long time that's not a relative, but even in a spousal or pursuit to get married, or even dating for a while. Those things can be challenging to let go of, but you owe it to yourself. You're valuable. You're valuable in a sense, and this goes for guys and girls, because guys have difficulty just as much as women when it comes to
their identity.
When it comes to identity, but also comes to being in a good, healthy relationship, to where you put value on yourself just as much as you put on the other person, because until you value yourself, you can't put value on another person.
You're going to attract someone else who does not value themselves because you don't value yourself. So I just think it's important that we talk about, when we're talking about conflict resolution, sometimes the resolution will not bring reconciliation.
Right.
Sometimes you have to be okay with, not that
holding grudges. You're not holding grudges.
You're not holding grudges. Scott told us one thing. He said, people who walk in offense, they can't get out and no one can get in. You want to build bridges, not fences. And so you have to be okay with understanding that I love this person, I care about them, I want it to work, but I value me enough not to allow how you feel about you to devalue me.
Right.
And so understanding that conflict resolution sometimes will not bring reconciliation.
So we passed a lot of information. This, believe it or not, this has gone by super fast.
Yeah.
And we can keep going on, and we're going to revisit some conflict resolution things.
Different aspects of it.
Absolutely. But just to do kind of a summary, if you kind of jumped in near the end, we kind of talked about some of the 5 primary conflict resolution styles that you have, where you go through from suppression to avoidance, with the goal of trying to get to a resolution. But even when you're doing resolution, you have some habits that you may have developed that can prevent you from getting a firm resolution on, where you can be very charismatic and flattering. You try to persuade, you promise things, you play the shame and also play games. You threaten people, and you can be threatened or even physical. So those are things that you can be anti-habits to getting to a resolution. But you can also have some positive action steps that you can actually take. We went through a 10-step process of coming to a resolution. It's a process that you actually go through to get to a point to where you can say, hey, I feel we're in a good place as it pertains to this situation, that we are moving forward and we're getting better at. And just like anything else, you play like you practice.
Right. And another thing that we didn't talk about is like what we do. The reason why we are doing this is because we realize that most people don't have the tools. They don't have the support. They don't have the community. And so sometimes when you have a conflict as a spouse or in a relationship, you may need an outside person.
Right.
And that's biblical. If you try to go to this person and you can't resolve it, sometimes you need a neutral party or person, a mentor, someone in your life to kind of help you to kind of see your part in it. And so that's what we're here for. That's a part of what this whole podcast, and it's our life's mission, is to help build, repair, and restore healthy relationships with individuals, yourselves, with God, people, and of course, food, because that's a part of what I'm called to do. But if you need help with that, if you need people to have in your life that can speak life to you, if you notice I mentioned different people that have the authority to speak into my life, first, God and my husband, but when I was younger, my godmother. We need those people in our life that can speak to us that we will listen to. I talked about it before. Everyone is always talking about having a vision board party. We need to have a decision board party. Who's on your board that helps you to make decisions about things that matters of the heart and things where sometimes you might be in your own way? Who are those people in your life?
Mm-hmm. So that's a good point to close the show out on. So just remember, we are always here. We try to help where we can, and we want to provide good information when we can. So thank you for joining us on the Rich Relationship Podcast with Gil and Renee. Okay, hear us next week.
Yeah.
Later.
Bye.
Gil and Renee Beavers' over 30-year relationship is the genesis for the Rich Relationship Podcast, which is designed to empower individuals with the tools, principles, and the community needed to unpack ourselves, our past, and our preconceived notions associated with relationships.
Let's get empty and grow together so that our lives will be filled with love and healthy, rich relationships.
Thank you for listening. Thank you for your investment in time. Remember to subscribe to the show and hit the notification icon to be notified when new episodes are posted on the podcast platform that you're listening from.
Or you can always find us on our website at richrelationshipsus.com or our YouTube channel, Rich Relationships with Gil and Renee. If you found this podcast helpful or you think it could help someone that you know and care about, please pass it along and share it with them.
And also, you can always send your questions and comments to richrelationships.us@gmail.com. This is a weekly podcast, and the new episodes are going to be posted on Monday by 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. Remember, we're stronger together.
Let's grow.